We know sleep is important, but I'm willing to bet that there's some things that you just didn't know that being sleep deprived could do. So today I'm gonna go over 6 surprising things you probably did not know about being sleep deprived. Number 1 is it makes you more emotionally volatile. Studies show that employees who are underslept tend to be more rash and unethical in their decision making compared to people who sleep more. For example, one study showed that employees who sleep 6 hours or less per night are significantly more deviant and more likely to lie the next day compared to people who sleep more. Also, people who sleep less are more likely to perceive people as more malicious or more as enemies, even though they probably aren't. So why does this happen? Well, when we sleep, we have different stages, and they're categorized as either non-REM or REM sleep. So you have this 90-minute sleep cycle, and then in the beginning, you have these different stages of your non-REM sleep. And then as you get deeper in those non-REM sleep stages, then you transition into REM sleep. And REM sleep is where most of your dreaming occurs. Now, both NREM and REM sleep are really important, but REM sleep specifically is important for processing emotions. And one reason for that is when you're in REM sleep and you're dreaming, you have no adrenaline in your brain. And that's actually the only point in your whole 24-hour cycle where there's no adrenaline in your brain. Now, technically it's called noradrenaline, but it's the same thing. And adrenaline is a very key stress chemical, and people who have a lot of this are more likely to be more anxious. Now, this is important because MRI studies show that key emotional and memory processes are being reactivated when people are in REM sleep. So in other words, when you are dreaming, you are remembering these emotional memories, but it's being done in a neurochemically safe, like a stress-free environment. Now, the reason that this is super important is that it can separate the emotion from trauma. So they also did other studies where they had these healthy people look at these very emotional pictures while in an MRI scanner. And they had them look at these images again 12 hours later. So either the people were looking at the images first thing in the morning and then 12 hours later in the evening, or they looked at them in the evening and then went to sleep and looked at them the next morning. What they found is when viewing the images the second time, the people that slept in between had significantly less emotion when viewing those images. Another study, even dating back to the 1960s, they were doing an experiment where they took away people's REM sleep. And after just a few days, these people became very depressive and they had a lot of anxiety and psychotic behaviors. Now, the second thing that a lack of sleep does is it makes you less productive. So employees have this thing called a KPI, or a key performance indicator. Basically, it's this super annoying thing that measures how much revenue the employee is bringing in, or how many goals they've achieved, or how successful they are in general. Now, this KPI score tends to be worse when people are sleep deprived. So one example of this is this study, and it found that when employees were sleep deprived, they came up with both fewer and less accurate solutions to work-related problems. And it's not just that. Employees also tackle less challenging problems in the first place. And what's even worse is they don't even realize that they're choosing the easier options. For example, if you give people different choices of doing a really easy task versus a harder task, like listening to voicemails versus coming up with a strategy to a new problem, then people who are sleep deprived will consistently choose the easier option. And this is not even the case with just work-related problems. Even simple things like getting dressed in the morning. People who are sleep deprived are more likely to just put on simple clothes versus get dressed up and ready for work. Now, how do we know it's specifically the lack of sleep that's causing people to be lazy? Well, this study will help answer that. So this study had a group of people and they had them sleep a full night of sleep the first night, and then the next night they had them become sleep deprived. And in a nutshell, they found the same results. After the night of sleep deprivation, they got more lazy with their choices. Also, if you're sleep deprived, you're less likely to like your job overall. And if you're a leader or a boss, your employees, if they're sleep deprived, they're less likely to like you. Now, companies are starting to catch on because employees who sleep more tend to earn more for companies. And you're also more likely to earn more for yourself, too. One study was showing that simply sleeping 1 hour more every night would help an employee earn about 4 to 5% higher wages. And we've seen now that different companies are adapting to this. For example, Nike is allowing people to kind of pick their schedule around their circadian rhythm time so people can get an adequate amount of sleep. And also different companies have come up with these napping pods like Google or NASA, and they've also seen improved performance as well. Now, number 3 is sleep deprivation can be used as torture. Now, this one might seem a little far-fetched, but it can really highlight the importance of simply sleeping enough. Now, most of the time, torture is associated with some sort of physical assault, but more modern forms of torture really try to get rid of this physical evidence. And this is where sleep deprivation torture comes in, and this is being used by a lot of countries still to this day. Now the thing is, I don't even think it's that useful. Not even talking about torture in general. You're literally putting someone in the most useless brain state possible. And think about trying to come up with some sort of confession or some sort of accurate depiction of what's going on from that sleep-deprived person. You're probably not going to get any sort of credible information. And what's even worse is innocent people who did nothing wrong are more likely to confess simply because they're being sleep-deprived. Now, number 4 is you are more likely to get sick. Okay, now this one probably isn't a huge surprise. I mean, sleep is our way for our bodies to heal and to recover, and this is also why when people are sick in the first place, why they need more sleep. Now, this study took 23 people, and it had them become sleep-deprived for just one night between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m. And they found that the average function of their natural killer cells fell by about 28%. NK or natural killer cells are our white blood cells, and they are very important, and they'll destroy things like infected cells and cancer cells. So if these are not functioning properly, we're going to be way more likely to get sick. And this huge drop in our immune system happened after just one day of being sleep deprived. Now imagine if you're someone that is constantly sleep deprived, like every single day. And it's not just about getting sick. Even vaccines will work less for you if you were sleep deprived. So a study from 2002 took 2 groups of healthy adults. Either they had them sleep 4 hours a night for a week or 7 to 9 hours a night for a week leading up to their flu shot. After they got their flu shot, the sleep-deprived people produced less than 50% of the same immune response compared to the people that were not sleep-deprived. The worst part was, even if those sleep-deprived people tried to recover their sleep after they got their vaccine, the damage was already done and they didn't recover. So no matter what, if you're gonna get a vaccine, make sure you're sleeping. Number 5 is your memories and reaction time go way down. Now this might be a little surprising, but hardly anyone can function at their peak when they're sleeping less than 8 hours a night. And there's studies showing that even sleeping 6 hours a night for 10 days straight is the equivalent of someone staying up for 24 hours straight. So this sleep research was done by David Dinges, who is a sleep researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. His main question was, how long can humans go before their performance is impaired? Now his test was pretty simple. It's called the psychomotor vigilance test, or the PVT for short. Basically, he had people looking at a computer screen, and they would press a button in response to a flash of light. So this flash of light would come at random times. So sometimes there would be like a back-to-back flash of light, or sometimes it would be a pause up to like 10 seconds. So he was measuring 2 different things, your reaction time and whether or not you even responded or not. So he had 4 different groups. One group stayed awake for 3 nights doing the tests, one group only slept 4 hours a night, one group slept 6 hours a night, and the last group slept 8 hours a night. God, I wish I was part of that group. So what he found is no matter what, any sort of sleep deprivation caused a general slowing in people's reaction times. But he also found that people also tended to not respond at all. Now these are things called microsleep. So it's a real life equivalent of you driving and all of a sudden someone appears in front of you, but you're not reacting at all because you're in this sort of microsleep. A microsleep is when your brain briefly becomes unaware of the outside world. And when this happens to you, you can also lose control of your motor abilities, like if you're driving a car and someone walks in front of you. And if you don't think this is real, statistics show that every hour a person dies in the US because of being too tired and they die in a car crash. So going back to the study, I'm not going to talk too much about the group that slept 8 hours a night because those guys were very stable throughout and their results were very good in terms of their reaction times and also whether or not they responded in general. They didn't really show many microsleeps. And also, I'm not going to talk too much about the group that pulled all-nighters because that's also pretty obvious. They had terrible results. I mean, after just one night of not sleeping, their missed responses increased by about 400%. And then that would also exponentially increase every single night that they did not sleep. If you look at a graph, there was literally no sign of their missed responses plateauing at any point. Now, what's most scary is there were similar findings in the groups that slept 4 hours and 6 hours a night. The group that slept 4 hours a night, after just 6 nights, they were just as impaired as the group that stayed awake all night long. And this continued to just keep escalating throughout the study. And by the 11th night, if they kept sleeping 4 hours, they were the equivalent of someone who stayed up for 2 nights straight. And this is even true for the group that slept 6 hours a night. For them, it took them 10 days, but after 10 days of sleeping 6 hours, they were just as impaired as someone who was staying up all night long. And again, just like the other studies, their impairment showed no sign of plateauing. It just kept getting worse exponentially. And similar studies have been repeated and showed very similar results. Now, I would say that most people think sleeping 6 hours is enough. I mean, think about most high schoolers or even most workers. A lot of people do not sleep more than 6 hours a night. Now, the worst part of this was that people did not know how sleep deprived they were. In surveys afterwards, people were asked how sleep deprived they think they were. And they consistently answered that they think that they're fine. It's kind of similar like someone being drunk and them thinking that they're fine to drive home. Obviously, we say it's bad if someone's drunk, but we don't really bat an eye when someone's sleep deprived. Now, the worst part of this was the people who were sleep deprived, when they tried to do some nights of recovery sleep, they never got back to their normal baseline. They even gave them 3 nights of recovery sleep where they got to sleep as much as they wanted to, and their performance was never the same. And the reason is the brain can never really sleep off sleep deprivation. And it's really just highlighting the importance of getting consistent, regular sleep. Now, number 6, the last thing that you probably did not know about sleep deprivation is it can make you a type 2 diabetic. So scientists did a bunch of epidemiology studies across the world, and they found a very strong link between being sleep deprived and having type 2 diabetes. Now, obviously, simply having a huge correlation does not mean that there's some sort of causation, right? But it does pique our interest. But luckily, we have more research on it. So scientists did another experiment, and they took these healthy people and they had them sleep for just 4 hours a night for only 6 nights. Those healthy people were 40% less effective at absorbing glucose. Now, that is alarming, because if those same results had been taken to an independent doctor, they'd probably be diagnosed as having pre-diabetes. And scientists even took biopsies of these participants after the study, because they wanted to see what exactly was causing them to not absorb their glucose. They found that the cells in these participants became far less insulin sensitive. Their cells actually started repelling the glucose. And this is exactly what happens when someone becomes a type 2 diabetic. Their cells become more and more insulin resistant. As a result, their glucose just cannot get absorbed. And also, other studies show that when people sleep less, they just tend to eat more. And specifically, they eat worse foods. They eat more refined carbohydrates, and they just go for unhealthier choices. On average, people will eat about 300 calories more on a day that they're sleep deprived. So if you were to take one thing away from this video, it's just make sure you try to get 8 hours of sleep every night. Oil pulling. Is it good? Is it bad? I mean, what even is it? Oil pulling has become a very popular topic. Now, what exactly is oil pulling? Oil pulling is basically when you take some coconut oil and you put it in your mouth and you swish it around for about 20 minutes and then you spit it out. Now, why on earth would anyone ever do that? The main